Hi, everyone. Sorry, I'm a couple minutes late. I got hung up in another meeting, but glad I could be here a little early. You guys feeling okay? I think you have, let me make sure you have the controls. You do now. And let me see here. Just how many registrations we have. We're up to 110. So for that, we'll get started promptly at 3, just because, you know, we can't really wait for 100 people to join. And, and I know you have a lot to cover. So those of you who are on the call now, we'll be starting promptly at 3. So relax, get a cup of coffee and stay tuned. Welcome everyone who's coming in. I just want to note that we'll be starting promptly at 3, but welcome and thanks for joining us. So stay tuned.
All right.
Erin, should I go ahead and share the screen with everybody at this point?
Yeah, why not? Go ahead and share the screen, make sure that's set up. And for those of you who are new, who just joined us, thanks and welcome. We'll get started in just a minute. I guess just a reminder to please mute your microphones if you haven't already. And I will, we have folks watching the chat, so if you have some questions, feel free to add them there. There'll be plenty of time for questions and discussion. Okay, just a minute more. I have a question in the chat. Yes, we will we'll share the recording after the session for sure. Okay, it's 3 o'clock on the nose. Welcome everyone. Thanks for joining us on this very special webinar on the Student Cognition Toolbox. This is empowering students to become better learners. And we have with us today Catherine and Victor, who are going to, I can let them introduce themselves, but are friends from the University of New Hampshire that helped develop this and has done really great work on it. I'm very excited for them to show it off and let you know about this new content available from the Open Learning Initiative. So I'll just turn it over to them.
Hello, everybody. My name is Catherine Overson, and I work at the Center for Excellence in Innovation in Teaching and Learning at the University of New Hampshire, where for over a decade, we work with faculty across the university to help them to implement strategies that are consistent with cognitive science that also meet the goals of their learning objectives for their courses. We continue to do this work, but this topic is about the Student Cognition Toolbox. And what makes this special is that we put the hands of learning directly into the students' control. And in doing so, we empower them to become better learners. So today's topic is the Student Cognition Toolbox, Tour and Implementation. My name is Catherine Overson, and with me is Victor Benassi. He will be actually taking you on the tour. I'll provide you with some pre-information. And also Lauren Cordonaway from our office is going to be monitoring the chat. Well, we'll open up for chat at the end of the session. So if you have any questions that occur to you along the way, please use the chat box to ask your questions, and she will assemble the questions at the end and pose your questions when we're all done. So moving on. First, I want to acknowledge some special people that have helped to make this.
This is something that of course, I'm joining another word. You know what I do, that's what I do. I'm sorry.
Please remember to mute your lines, please. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'd like to acknowledge our Student Cognition Toolbox developers. Some of us have been there from the very beginning and continue to be so. Others were there at various portions of this time, and we have some new people as well. And so these are the people, all the people that were involved in the development of the Student Cognition Toolbox. I'd like to recognize them. I'd also like to recognize our funding agency, Davis Educational Foundation, who has funded us in all of our activities over the last greater than decade. We're very pleased and delighted that they have had confidence in us to succeed in all the work that we're doing, and we're very happy with this latest edition, the Student Cognition Toolbox. I'd also like to thank the people at the University of New Hampshire, in particular the Academic Affairs Office, and all of the teachers and the many students who have experienced the Student Cognition Toolbox. Special thank you and acknowledgement to our CMU collaborators and partners who have helped us to develop and implement this Student Cognition Toolbox onto the platform of OLI. We're very pleased about that. We're also happy that they pretty much helped us out with anything that we wanted. For example, we wanted a survey implanted into the Student Cognition Toolbox, and they very beautifully made that happen, and Victor will demonstrate that when he does the tour. So we're very thankful about that as well. So for today's talk, we're going to talk about choosing a cognitively based study strategy when teachers implement study strategies into their course. So learning activities, one good way to do that is to think about the learning goal. And we teach students about this too. Understand what your learning goal is will better help you to succeed as you select a study strategy. This is at the core of the Student Cognition Toolbox. I'll also be giving you a brief overview of the study strategies that are embedded within the SCT. I'll also give you a general Student Cognition Toolbox module template, that is, give you a broad overview of the student experience during engaging with the Student Cognition Toolbox. Victor, as I said, will give you a tour of the SCT. After the tour, we're going to return back to the slideshow, and doing that, we're going to talk about how you might incorporate the Student Cognition Toolbox into courses that you teach. And then we'll wrap up with Q&As. As I said, if you have any questions along the way, please write them down into chat, and Lauren will assemble them and relay your questions at the end. So we're going to begin with choosing a choosing a cognitively based study strategy, one that you might use in the Student Cognition Toolbox. And what we're really talking about here is how do we activate and enhance student learning? Well, it sort of depends. And it really depends on three major questions that you want to consider. The first question is, what kind of knowledge does your student need to attain? In other words, what are the goals for the kind of learning outcomes that you want your students to attain? And here are some examples that facts, concepts, etc. These might be course outcomes, they might be chapter related outcomes or unit related outcomes, and they can vary throughout the semester. They can vary from course to course, of course, as well. Based on those learning outcomes, what kind of learning processes are involved? So there's some ideas of what might be involved. And based on these two questions, you would come up with a learning strategy or study strategy that you would either incorporate into your course or that the students would learn about through the Student Cognition Toolbox. I'll give you an example how this might work. So if you have a course, say anatomy and physiology, for example, and their students need to learn a lot of facts with that course. So in that course, they might need to learn some facts and associations, what goes with what, what's connected to what influences what, and so forth. So a lot of facts and associations. So according to this model, the best intervention in terms of helping students to succeed might be quizzing, because it's facts. They have to learn associations, and retrieval practice might be the way for them to learn better. Take another example, problem solving or procedural skills, anything that involves a stepped procedure. So with that, students need to learn problem solving steps. Now these steps might be quantitative steps, they might be qualitative steps, depending on the nature of the activity that you want them to learn how to do. So the best learning strategy for them might be worked examples with some self-explanation. So that's just an idea of how this works. So with the Student Cognition Toolbox, we have currently 6 strategies, and I'm going to go over those strategies with you now so you can get an overview of the lay of the land, so to speak. So in the Student Cognition Toolbox, we start off with test-enhanced learning, also known as retrieval practice. This is where students review some material and then they are quizzed, or they respond, and they have to respond from memory to try to activate that content. So that's the first technique that they will learn. We next have a module that encompasses 2 kinds of reflective questioning. The first kind of reflection questioning is self-explanation. And in self-explanation, students are exposed to some material and then they respond to some question prompts that are designed to activate prior knowledge and to help them make associations with what they might or might not know already, and to help them to begin to learn how to apply that information. Another kind of reflective activity is elaborative interrogation. And this is where students take the information that they know and they try to draw connections between them. And the way they do that is by asking or responding to questions that ask them to respond to how something occurs or why it occurs, or some kind of application question. It kind of takes them beyond what the nuts and bolts of what it is that they're learning. The fourth study strategy that we have is worked examples. And I mentioned this earlier in my example of how you would proceed. And worked examples is important with any kind of procedure that involves steps, whether it's a mathematic or chemistry solution they need to arrive at, or whether it's maybe how to write up a term paper or do some other qualitative procedural activity. The key that makes this work is that students are provided with a step-by-step activity, but their response, what makes it really work, is that they explain to themselves every step of the way how they arrived at that step, why they wanted to get there, and what's coming up next. So then we have a couple of study strategies having to do with scheduling study. The first one is distributive practice. And we know that a lot of students tend to mass their practice, or you can call it cram their practice before an exam. And that is okay in the short term, but not so good in the long term. So if they need to retain that information later on in the semester or for another course, it doesn't tend to work as well. So we want students to be able to distribute their practice over time. It's also called spacing practice. And we explain to them how and why they need to do that. The other kind of scheduling study is interleave practice. And this is where learners move between related topics as they're studying. So they're not—
Oh, hi, this is Terry Ronning. I didn't recognize the number at first. You called me, probably, maybe.
So, thank you. So they're not—
Okay, what time?
So with interleave practice, students are not blocking their study all on one subtopic at a time. They move between subtopics of a general overall topic. So that's an overview of the study strategies that we currently have in the Student Cognition Toolbox. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is to give you a general overview of what the students will experience in the SCT broadly. So when students first enter the Student Cognition Toolbox, they will enter into an introductory a module. We bookend all of our our modules by a introductory module and a summary module. The very first thing they do before they encounter any information is to take a study behavior inventory. This is a 16-question prompt where students respond to the degree to which they agree that this is how they typically study. And the way we've developed it is half of those questions are shallow study strategies and half of them are deep study strategies. And so we get an indication pretty early on as to what kinds of study strategies these students tend to use. It also helps them to begin thinking about the study strategies that they tend to use. As they enter into the study strategy modules proper, what they will do initially, let's just say that this is the retrieval practice module. Students will first enter into a practice exercise where they have a brief reading of some material to be learned. The material that we've chosen is from an introductory open source psychology textbook. We have them engage in a very brief reading of that. We've chosen introductory psychology as our getting experience part of the Student Cognition Toolbox because we felt that it was accessible to most students, and most students are somewhat familiar with psychology or interested in it or will be taking it at some point in their college career. So they read a very brief reading on that, and then they will engage in the activity of which that module is the topic. So if it's retrieval practice, or then what will happen is they'll do a brief reading. They will respond to some questions where they have to retrieve the information. They'll do another brief reading and have to respond to some questions. Victor will show you when he does the tour another example of how this works. After that, they get into the lesson proper. In the lesson proper, students are actually learning about the study skill that is the topic of that module. So if it's retrieval practice or practice quizzing, we call it, then they learn about that. So they learn what it is, why they did it, why it's important, under what conditions they would use it. That is, what is their learning goal, for example, why would they use it, and so forth. After they've completed all of the modules, then they will have the summary module where again, they would retake the study behavior inventory post. And unlike the study behavior inventory at the beginning, where they were to relate to each one of those prompts as to how they typically study in preparation for a major assessment, now we're asking them on reflection of the Student Cognition Toolbox, how they intend to study in the future. So that's generally what the students will experience. So I wanted to share with you our 3 editions of the Student Cognition Toolbox that we deployed at the University of New Hampshire. We started off with the first deployment in 2019 and then again in the spring, and we've just completed the deployment for this fall. Now, when I say the different deployments, what we've done is that in the Student Cognition Toolbox, we have built in multiple opportunities to gather information to help us to reflect on what the student experience was, how they performed, and their thoughts and their experiences, and to refine and improve subsequent editions. So our first deployment was in 2019. We collected information from the students in terms of how they performed on their checkpoint quizzes, which we had checkpoint quizzes for at the end of every module to assess how they learned the material. We also looked at the reflections. We've built in a lot of reflection activities so that we can get into their thoughts into how they are experiencing it. Do they have any questions? They seem to be getting it. How might they use it? Are they planning on using it in the future appropriately, and all of that? And we used all of those responses to help us to develop the next edition of the Student Cognition Toolbox. The one that you're going to see today is the 4th edition, and that edition is going to be released on the OLI platform as an open source very shortly. So you'll be able to access that one. At UNH, the Student Cognition Toolbox reached approximately 4,500 students from a variety of disciplines. As you can see, they're listed here broadly. And so we feel that, that it is well suited no matter what the discipline is. As you can see, we have a wide range of disciplines here. And so we hope that we would be able to interest you in employing the Student Cognition Toolbox for courses that you teach. And I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague, Victor Benassi, who will give you a tour of what this looks like. So Victor, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and have you share yours.
All right, thank you, Catherine. Hello, everybody. All right. Let me move this down here. All right, I hope everybody can see this. I'm sure, I don't know what the number is, but some number of you out there have taught using OLI courses. So this looks very familiar to you. This is the syllabus structure for our course. And I want to go over just quickly what it looks like. And what you'll see, Catherine mentioned that we have an introductory module. We then have 4 modules that address the 6 learning strategies that we're focusing on in this edition. Practice quizzing. And you'll notice in practice quizzing, there's a part 1. So when Catherine mentioned that students read a little bit of material from an introductory textbook, and in this case, take a practice quiz, get feedback. Then they go into part 2, which is the lesson proper for that module. And you'll see each of the modules has a checkpoint quiz at the end. Second one is reflective questioning. That was described to you as being broken up into 2 parts, a section on self-explanation and one on elaborative interrogation. The next one is worked examples. Then one on scheduling and organizing study sessions. So in other words, spacing, blocking, interleaving of practice. And then finally the bookend, which is a summary strategies module. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in first to the introductory module, show you a couple things. Of course, I'm not going to go through all of this in great detail. We'd be here till late tonight. So this is the introductory module. We thank everybody. We give them some information on how to navigate. We've found that students don't have any problem navigating the OLI platform. The first thing that students do is they complete the study behavior inventory, which has now been mentioned a couple times. So what I want to show you is this is the tool. So students, I've already completed this survey, so I can show you the graph, is that students answer these 16 questions here. And check them off. By the way, if they leave anything blank and they try to submit, we've got a fail-safe in there that they can't submit it. And then after they do submit it, they get a report. And that report is a graphic representation of their responses to each of the 16 items. We have the 8 deep strategy questions over here to the left in purple, and the 8 shallow strategies over to the right. And we actually provide the numbers and the questions so students can look, oh, what was that one, number 3 there that I listed very high? And what was that one that I have very low, and so on. Examples of shallow strategies would include rereading material over and over again, copying and recopying your notes over and over again, highlighting and underlining, asking friends or teachers for answers to questions after you can't figure it out immediately yourself, rather than trying to persevere, and so on. The deep strategies would be more like self-explanation and trying to figure things out on your own, doing practice quizzing, spacing out your study, and so on. After students take a look at that, they have an opportunity to pull everything together. And we have a reference here of an article. Many of these references are as much for teachers as they are for the students. If any teacher wants to do a deeper dive into a topic, and also see where we got our sources. In other words, we're not just making it up. It's based on something. Okay, so page 5. So page 5 is that what I want to show you here is what we call the study strategy selection table. So this is a somewhat different version of the table that Catherine showed you before. And what you can see is in the columns is when your learning goals are to learn facts, rules, principles, different kinds of outcomes, what strategies might be most relevant and applicable, meaning they produce desirable learning outcomes compared to control or comparison conditions. The technique, what might be helpful for you to do, and some things to keep in mind. We talk about caveats or boundary conditions a lot in here. This model here is clearly not unique to us. It is consistent with our thinking, but people like L.D. Fink has written about this idea of linking and backward design. Of course, the Codinger and colleagues knowledge learning instruction framework. If you haven't read that paper, it's a wonderful paper to read. Thomas and Mark McDaniel, they've written about this from the point of view of cognitive science, quite useful resources. All right. And that table is going to appear in every module, and we're going to direct students to the right row, depending on what strategy they're learning about in that module. All right, we'll go here to page 9. So our Student Cognition Toolbox was designed by us to instruct students on study strategies that are informed by science of learning, that have good research support for them, that they work under certain conditions. And that's what it's focused on. We don't instruct students about how to do the shallow stuff or the stuff that isn't so supportive of learning. We talked about it a little in our first edition, but it wasn't the focus. Well, one of the things that happened is students began to write questions. Why aren't you covering highlighting and underlining? I've been doing that since I was whatever. I took a course in high school and they told me how to highlight and underline. And why shouldn't I cram the night before the exam? So what we've done over our iterative improvements is we've included these many students wonder components. You see these in a lot of OLI courses. And we talk about, we instruct them about the shallow strategies and why they might not want to do those. So go here now. Hopefully this takes us to the reflective, oops. That's not what I wanted. There we go. To the reflective questioning module. So this is an example of one of the modules, and this module has 2 parts to it. Section 1, where students will read some material from an intro psych online text that we've described. And then in this case, is they will respond to some self-explanation prompts and provide answers. And then we'll go to section 2 of the module, which then provides the instruction, what Catherine referred to is the lesson proper. So let me just show you here, section 1. Here's some material. And we're not going to go through these in detail, but here are some self-explanation prompts. Describe the information that's new to you in this section. How do the new ideas work with what you already know? Explain the link with the new information to your prior knowledge. We know how important that is for certain learning outcomes, and then some I wonder questions. So that's the example where students actually practice doing the learning activity that's the target of that module. All right. Sorry. Okay. So in the second section, we have the standard learning objectives that are built into OLI. You have to build those up through your checkpoint quizzes and so on. And you'll notice that there's a section for reflective questioning described, reflective questioning, self-explanation, elaborative interrogation, because we have 2 strategies within this module, some summary, a reflective checkpoint, and then some questions that we ask the students. So let me just show you quickly a few of these items. Again, we're not going to focus on the substance, the content at this point. Is that we have the selection table again, and for self-explanation and elaborative interrogation, these 2 columns here are appropriate. So we give some material where we have students work through that. We then have material which describes, in this case, self-explanation. We give them some examples of the types of questions that might be used in self-explanation. They're doing a learn by doing activity. Again, for the OLI teachers out there, you know all about the learn by doing and did I get this activities. Just a little comment here. The a lot of the material in the Student Cognition Toolbox appears in tables. And one of the reasons that we did that is in our first edition, our fall 2019, it was very text heavy. And students reported to us that it was text heavy. And we also began to increasingly have that sense. So what we did was we took a lot of the material which was embedded in long, lengthy, beautifully constructed paragraphs, and we created tables to provide that material in an effective way. And we were informed by Richard Mayer's multimedia principles as we've created these tables throughout. In each module, we have a short, usually 4-minute, 5-minute video that is acted, if you will, acted by a UNH undergraduate student. This is Nin, and it provides a student's perspective on the study strategy, which is the focus of that module. I'm not going to show you Nin's video here, but we have one for each of the study strategies. Another learn by doing, we have those throughout. And let me go up here. All right. Learn by doing. I wanted to show you this is throughout the Student Cognition Toolbox. We have a number of graphics. We have a beautiful set of graphics for the spacing and interleaving distinction. And we did this because, again, in terms of multimedia principles, it's often more effective. That is, people acquire what it is you want to acquire when you provide the information in graphics that are constructed in a way that's consistent with multimedia principles. So I wanted to show you that. And I'm gonna now go to page 28. And here's the checkpoint quiz. So as we said, at the end of each module, we have a checkpoint quiz, which is scored. The instructor can do things in the background to give one attempt, more than one attempt, feedback, no feedback, that sort of thing. But we have a checkpoint quiz for each one. And those checkpoint quiz scores go into an instructor's grade book who uses the Student Cognition Toolbox. And just right here, what I want to show you after we're done with the module, when we complete the checkpoint quiz, we have two kinds of student reflection. Catherine has mentioned this and referenced it a couple times along the way in terms of feedback that we've gotten from students. But so we ask students to describe information that's new to them. How does this strategy of the module differ from, and how is it similar to what they've already done? Do they have any questions? That has been very helpful to us along the way for making iterative improvements and so on. And then we also ask students to list a course in which they might use this technique. Provide an example. This is what I would call planning. So these reflective questions are designed to try to increase and build self-regulation and improve metacognition on the part of students so that they better understand the learning process, but also their learning process. And we can and do look at these, and hopefully you begin to see changes in the development of their metacognition over the course of completion. You know, again, for those of you who have used OLI, there's a learning dashboard here. You know, this is wonderful because you can click on this and see the students' responses and respond to issues that you choose to in real time. In other words, you don't need to wait till the course is over and download the learning analytics to do that. You can look at it in real time. sort of like a mid-course student evaluation instead of an end of the semester one. Just here, lastly, on this page, every one of our modules ends with additional resources. So we have additional video or videos. We have material from blogs and websites and some other references, all of which has been sourced by us and run through our legal department for copyright. And all these materials are open and available for use without any worry about copyright infringement. And just lastly here, what I want to show you, page 42, provide a summary of the whole package. They're going to do the study behavior inventory again. They're going to review the study strategies, and they're going to provide a final reflection, which is really a plan for how they might move forward. So again, I'm not going to do anything other than show you the graph. I created this to make it look like, wait a minute, what happened? Here we go. The graph to make it look like we had wanted to look like. You notice that on the pre-inventory, these purple ones were relatively low. They weren't doing a lot of the good stuff. And the green ones were relatively high. They were doing a lot of the bad stuff. And that's what we find. And this is the end of the term. The deep responses going forward are relatively high. The shallow ones are relatively low. And that's what we want to see. And finally, what students do is they do a final reflection about the survey, how the changes they've made. Again, we're trying to work on metacognition, and there's their review, and then there's the finals table, the KLI-like table, and then here's a study strategies checkpoint quiz. This is a 10-item quiz on the whole Student Cognition Toolbox, and then we do the kind of reflection questions that we described before. So that, I know that's quick, and you know, there's probably not a lot of coherence in your thinking process because I've skipped all over the place, but I think the tour, what it does do is it provides you with an overview of what the toolbox looks like, and very soon you'll be able to go in and look at it yourself. So Catherine's going to reshare. There she goes. And just we'll wrap up.
Me too.
You're sharing it, right?
Yes.
Okay.
We lost it, I believe. The share screen. I'm not seeing it anymore.
Did I need to unshare? Is that-
Yeah,
no.
probably. It's there now. It's good.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I think I was muted before and I had to unshare so I could unmute. Anyway, thanks, Victor, for the tour. I just want to mention also that with all of the modules that we have in there, we try to make them as consistent as possible so that we're going to see the same kind of order throughout. So conditions under which you would use the strategies, best used when, and how to think about using them as you study for your courses and so forth. And so we try to keep that all consistent so that students know what to expect next. So moving forward, we have the default Student Cognition Toolbox boxes, which is the one that you just saw, where we have the introductory psychology material as practice material. So we have that right now. And what we're going to do is we are going to add 2 additional modules that will be ready maybe in the summer of 2021. And we're looking at prediction-based learning and dual coding right now. And those are already in various stages of completion, and they should both be ready to be deployed in the summer. So we're looking forward to that. Also moving forward, we're looking at discipline-specific student cognition toolbox courses. As I said, our default model has the introductory psychology open text material in there to provide students with a context and how to use the material. But we are also working on a statistics version where students actually practice using statistics information, introductory statistics information. And that student cognition toolbox is complete. We have not piloted it yet, as we have done with the other ones. And we are planning on piloting that at UNH in spring 2021. And hopefully that will be ready for your use by summer. So that's pretty close to being done. We also have one in works for chemistry. This is for introductory chemistry. In addition, biology and anatomy and physiology. So we picked these courses because these are courses that have typically large enrollment, people attending the courses. There a lot of undergraduates take these courses, and yeah, so we selected those to get started. I'm sure that others will be coming along, but that's in the near plan for now. All right.
Let me just mention, if any of you on this Zoom use the OLI statistics course, like statistical reasoning, and you're interested, I guess even if there are only a couple people, be fine, is if people are interested, I would be happy to do a tour with you of the statistics version of the course, like a version of what I just did with the intro psych one, but really focusing on the statistics part. And that this is particularly relevant for people that use the OLI statistics course, because the content that we use for students to practice the study skill is taken directly from OLI statistical reasoning. So it's completely linked. And so it's sort of the ideal circumstance where the toolbox and the course material are one and integrated. Okay. So you're going to show, so, ways that you could use this as a teacher. Well, one is, you might not want to use the Student Cognition Toolbox in your course for whatever reason, but you might want to provide a resource to students that might be helpful to them in their preparation, their study for your course. And you could refer them to the Student Cognition Toolbox, and if provided on the OLI site, it could be there for independent learners. Now, you don't get to see any of their data, the data aren't kept and so on, but it is a resource. It would be like telling students, oh, go and buy this book and read up on your own, or go look at this website. So that's one option. Another is as a text in a student academic success course. Now, a lot of colleges and universities offer courses, sometimes mini courses on how to succeed in college, or how to study in college, or academic success. And the Student Cognition Toolbox would be, in our view, a perfect accompaniment for such course. And remember, at the end of every module, there are additional resources that have been sourced by us as being relevant and applicable to that study strategy. Also, I didn't go over it, but at the end of the whole Student Cognition Toolbox, we have a massive bibliography of the sources that we used in getting our expertise up to snuff for building the Student Cognition Toolbox. So that's another way. Next is that in a course that you teach, you could assign either as an optional requirement, or an option or a requirement, the Student Cognition Toolbox. Now, we recommend doing it as a requirement, because our experience at UNH is that when teachers recommend that students do it, even if they give credit points or whatever, but it's optional, what we find is that some of the students do it. In fact, sometimes a lot of them do it, but the ones who do it tend to be the students that are actually doing the best in the course to start with. In other words, the students who might benefit the most are statistically less likely to do it if you make it an option. So that's just something to consider. You could use the Student Cognition Toolbox in a course that you teach that has nothing to do otherwise with OLI. In fact, I don't know if any of the teachers that we work with over the last 2 years were using OLI text material. They might have been, but most of them clearly weren't. And they just integrate the Student Cognition Toolbox with whatever they're doing. If you're using an OLI course already and you build the Student Cognition Toolbox into it, then you could even get closer integration. And as I said, and as Catherine said, soon we're going to have stat, chem, bio, and A&P anyway, versions that are completely integrated into the OLI platform.
I also want to mention, Victor, that when we had met with departments at UNH about the Student Cognition Toolbox, one department was so interested in it that the teachers in the department wanted to review the Student Cognition Toolbox. So as they designed and redesigned courses, they could develop learning strategies or learning activities in the course that were compatible with the strategies in the SCT.
Yeah, they approached it at a curricular level, which is like, right? Okay, all right. And then just to mention, you already know Lauren is out there in the Q&A. And we put this link here. This is the link that Aaron provided to register for today's session. But towards the bottom of that advertisement, there are 2 links to presentations that we gave to another group a couple weeks ago. And the first presentation, Catherine, is also a tour like today. So, but a little bit different, so you'd get some other aspects. But after that, Lauren did a presentation on how we've used the data that we've gotten from the Student Cognition Toolbox to make these iterative improvements. And so that could be of value. And then finally, I did a presentation on research that we've been doing on trying to validate the Student Cognition Toolbox as an instructional tool. So, right, I mean, we think about, you know, does a tool, does some measure, instrument, et cetera, have face validity? Does it look like it should look like if it's valid? Well, the Student Cognition Toolbox looks like that it's teaching students about cognitively based study strategies. But there's also the question of internal validity. Does it behave the way it should if it's a valid instrument or tool? And in that presentation, I present some data, some results, some statistical analyses that are supportive of the tool being a valid instrument. That's it.
Lauren, do we have any questions?
Yes, we have a lot of questions in chat. So if we do not get to your question at this point, please know that we will get answers to all the questions out afterwards. So I will do my best to try to get through all of them at this time. But if your question doesn't get answered, we will address it in some way in the future. Okay, so some of the questions were related to integration of this in a learning management system. And I know that that was briefly gone over on the previous slide. We use Canvas at UNH, and I was wondering if you could elaborate a little bit more on that.
Yeah, this is great questions. And what we do is we integrate the link for the Student Cognition Toolbox, in our case, directly into Canvas. So in Canvas, we provide a tab, a link. The LTI is put in there, and anybody can do it. I taught OLI statistics for a number of years, the statistical reasoning course, and once I got the link, I was able to do it very easily, not a problem. We at UNH, we assist the faculty because they're working with us on this project in doing that. But it's very easy to integrate. Once the student clicks on that link, the first time the student goes in, they register, click submit, and that's it. After that, then what happens is anytime they click on that link, it takes them in. It doesn't take them to where they were last, but it takes them in and they can navigate through the course syllabus. So it's very easy, and we haven't had really any problems with it at all.
Thank you, Victor. How long does it take a student to complete the student toolbox? And in addition to that question, is it used all year or all semester? Can you talk about how it stays open and how long it takes to complete?
I'll respond to that one. So the Student Cognition Toolbox, if you sit down from beginning to end, takes about 2 to 2.5 hours to complete. We don't recommend students complete it in that way. As we talked about distributed practice, it works better if they take a little bit at a time over the course of 1 or 2 weeks. We generally recommend that faculty assign the Student Cognition Toolbox within the first 2 weeks of the course. And this is really for practical reasons in terms of getting the students to get it done. And students are oftentimes motivated at the beginning. And also, we recommend that they recommend to their students to do 1 module at a sitting. So each module can take anywhere from 10 to 15 minutes to complete. So it really is not a lot of work for them to do at a single setting, and really preferable if they do it over a course of 2 weeks or so.
Yeah, let me also add here that the second part of that question about about using it over time is that we're going to provide for people that use the toolbox an instructor's guide, if you will, and in there it's going to have a lot of information. But one of the kinds of topics that's going to be covered is, all right, how as a teacher take advantage of the use of the toolbox by the students. So in other words, the students complete the SCT in the first 2 weeks. All right, I mean, I'm just using statistics because it's a course I've taught, makes sense to me. So a few weeks down the line, students are going to get histograms or frequency distributions. And they're going to have to learn how to calculate or go through to do an interquartile range, stem and leaf, or whatever it might be. Is that as an instructor, what I can do now that I know that students have been exposed to, been administered the toolbox relative, say, to doing worked examples, I can push them back to that saying, all right, here you're learning about how to do the interquartile range to create the histograms, etc. Go back and look at the material on worked examples. And oh, by the way, here's an example of a work example that you can work through. In other words, a teacher can build their course design where their assignments are consistent. Catherine started this whole thing with saying it's over the last decade, what we've done is we've worked with teachers to help them design and implement interventions, which are these very interventions that are in the toolbox. But the teachers design it sort of to make it more likely that the students will do it. So by creating assignments that take advantage of what the students have learned in the toolbox, our view is that's sort of the A prime way to go.
Great. And there was a question about, will it be available next year too? So you talked about how there's going to be a version available in the spring. Will that continue to be available next fall?
Yeah. So let's see how our partners at CMU are on the program here. We'll keep doing the OLI's Student Cognition Toolbox as long as they'll have us. That's the answer to that. The answer is yes. We're not intending this to be a one-time deal. No, absolutely. And in fact, because of our approach to this whole thing, we will continue to make iterative improvements so that subsequent editions that come out take advantage and reflect the improved. I mean, what we're trying to do is just keep building the learning outcomes that we're getting. And when we see weaknesses in the design, we're going to improve that.
And we're also going to grow the Student Cognition Toolbox. As I mentioned earlier, we already have 2 additional study strategies in the works.
Right.
Great, thank you. And it seemed that there was a lot of interest in the chat for the content specific versions that you mentioned that we're working on. So that really drew a lot of excitement on the part of the audience. I did want to address that one of the questions was, can you integrate your own course content into the Student Cognition Toolbox? Somebody was wondering if they could edit the Student Cognition Toolbox. I believe that that was the question. And then the other thing I want you to address is whether it's appropriate at all for K through 12.
Yeah, let me answer the second part first, and I think if someone from CMU might be better for the first one. But I mean, my understanding is that resource is open, and if somebody wants to go in and create some version of their own, that they can do that. The K through 12, the closer you get to K, no, less so. The closer you get to 12 and 12, probably. And the reason for that, there are two things that are going on. One is that when you read this document, when you get into it, the SCT, it's written in a serious way. And it's written for, I mean, we've actually, if anybody knows about reading difficulty or reading ease calculators and so on, there's something called the Flesch-Kincaid reading difficulty index and so on, is that this material really is written at sort of a senior high school, college level, reading level. So clearly at a younger age, closer to K, it wouldn't be a resource for the students to use. Teachers, yes, and then they can apply them and so on. But the other piece about it is, so we're careful, a lot of the research is done with, that we're talking about, is done with high school and college students. And so we want to be careful about generalizing, the effects that have been obtained with those populations with younger children. There's some research on practice quizzing with really young kids and so on. So, we don't have time for a tutorial on that, but clearly if you're a teacher, there are things that you could glean when you're working with middle school. I know McDaniel and Roediger, who are big names in test enhanced learning, they've had a decade worth of grants where they've worked with middle school kids on the so-called testing effect, and it's robust and powerful.
Great. And, a question related to scope and audience was proposed. How granular are the instructions for worked examples and practice testing? What is the scope of the recommendations for practice quizzing and worked examples? How specific are they? Do you talk about the different moderators, how to make practice quizzing most effective with a very fine level of detail that can be applied?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I hopefully we've gotten at a granularity level that is helpful to students, especially in terms of their learning outcomes, but not so granular that it just gets overwhelming. I'm thinking about my friend and colleague Ken Kadinger from Carnegie Mellon that talks about 3 trillion combinations of independent variables. In other words, the moderator effects and the interaction terms, can become amazing. But having said that, one of the things that you're going to see when you go into the Student Cognition Toolbox, we specifically talk about, if you're using, like, let's just pick interleaving of practice, is that what we say is that, mixing things up, subtopics up. So like if you're learning about statistical tests and which ones to use in certain circumstances, but not other, interleaving where you ask questions about t-test and analysis of variance and you go back and forth can be a very powerful learning techniques. We've done research at UNH on this very thing. But it's also the case that with something like that, that actually doing block practice, which is usually the control condition in interleaving studies, or it's one of them, is that for material where you haven't mastered the basics, it's better to block your practice first before you go to interleaving. So that, I think that's an example of kind of granularity that the questioner's asking about. And what I think you'll see in the toolbox is we do that kind of stuff all over the place. In other words, we try to be conservative and we try not to oversell it. And you know, we, even in Catherine's presentation, she has the "it depends," and that's the moderator variables or the interaction effects.
Great. We have interest from someone who wants to talk about using this in foreign language classrooms. And so I want to know if you could just spend a minute describing how that's gone for us.
Yeah, I mean, we've done a little work, not very much, either with the Student Cognition Toolbox or even working directly with faculty who teach language courses. But let's just pick in, say, learning elementary Spanish course, you know, college level Spanish course, that the student cognition techniques, for example, interleaving and spacing, because you got to learn your IR verbs and your ER and your AR, right? Verbs is that, and the more advanced you get, the more confusing. Interleaving your study there could be very effective. So, you know, depending on the subject matter, some of the tools might be more applicable than others. In other words, some might be less applicable. In other words, in a physics class, you're going to be working on worked examples a lot. In a Spanish class, maybe not so much, although somebody could go, oh no, we do this or that. So clearly retrieval practice, self-explanation, trying to get understanding, for example, about grammatical constructions, maybe, and how they differ in English and in Spanish in this case, and so on. So just to say, we picked the topics to focus on for discipline specific, partly because these are, you know, what is called popular subject matters and many students take them. The other is we have a lot of expertise in the center in biology, chemistry, psychology, statistics. I mean, Lauren's PhD is in the biological science and genetics and so on. So we know something about those subject matters. We're always looking for partners. So if somebody wants to develop a discipline-specific version in Spanish, I don't see any reason why it couldn't happen.
It looks like there's a lot of interest also in physics. And Norm is with us, and he was talking about potentially integrating this with physics in the spring.
Yeah, I mean, that's a perfectly good example. So in our case, unless I don't know certain things about some of the people in our center, is that we're not physics people. So the toolbox part, we got it covered. You know, knowing how to use that in terms of physics material, that's where the discipline expertise comes in.
Given enough time, I think that we can absolutely, you know, continue to bring up our repertoire for more and more, you know, course specific content, especially considering the good partnerships that we have with faculty throughout UNH across different departments.
Catherine, maybe could you say something about the kind of reaction you've heard from faculty? Lauren, you also, you know, from their experience with using the toolbox?
Well, as I said earlier, one of the things that sticks out in my mind is that faculty have been influenced by the Student Cognition Toolbox in their own course design. So to me, that speaks volumes about the value of the Student Cognition Toolbox.
Yeah, I think that is one of the most important outcomes as well. Specifically, faculty ask if it would be smart for them to read through the toolbox with fine detail so that they can design learning activities and use the right vocabulary and reinforce this.
You know, I think another thing that it highlights for faculty is something that they aren't outwardly aware of, and that is providing students or providing their course with goals and objectives and learning outcomes. And I think that going through this helps them to rethink their course in new ways that helps them to really clearly define what it is they want their students to learn. And in turn, that helps the students to succeed because they know where they're going.
Right. Yeah. If a teacher assigned the toolbox, said, okay, do this during the first 2 weeks, and then, that was it. They never brought it up again or whatever. That would be better than nothing. But it would be too bad because, doing what the questioner was suggesting is, learning about what's in the toolbox yourself as a teacher, thinking about how you can create your assignments that reflect your learning goals, and go to the table and go, we should be doing some homework assignments that have self-explanation built into them. And we want people to know why does this happen in this order of a sequence with blah, 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 and a procedure. Elaborative interrogation is a powerful tool to help students learn that kind of outcome.
The other thing is, I think that in this online learning environment, people are looking for more and more ways to have students be actively engaging with each other in the classroom. And wouldn't this be a great opportunity for students to discuss among each other, leveraging different study strategies? I mean, wouldn't that be really fertile ground to have, interactive discussions, say, this is the topic that we're going to learn about. I want you guys to brainstorm ways that we should be using these study strategies to research this information or communicate this information in different ways. I mean, this is just kind of endless in terms of the possibilities for that.
Yeah, that's a really amazing suggestion to have students work together in teams. There reminds me, I'm going to block on who the author is, but if the questioner is interested, I can dig it up. Is that there's some research that shows that when students work together on practice quizzing, so it's just one technique, but practice quizzing as a team and finding out what they need to do, answering questions, etc. When they take a high stakes exam independently, not in a group anymore, that is on that kind of material, students that did practice quizzing in a group perform better when they have to have independent high stakes assessment than when, so let's say you have 5 people group, the control group would be 5 different people that just did it on their own. So what the questioner is doing is taking that to a whole other level and thinking about the whole package and how they can use it. One of the things that happens with group work, if it's done well, is that, if I start going down a path, the wrong path, there's going to be somebody else in that group that puts me back where I should be going. And it's sort of a check and balance within the group. And so that's one of the issues with some of these strategies. Somebody might go, oh, we need to do interleaving. And then somebody else says, well, but we don't know much about this yet. So maybe we should block our practice first. Erin, are we going to be able to save the chat?
Yes, I will save the chat and
Okay.
I will definitely get the video out to folks.
Yeah, and anything that we didn't answer or didn't answer adequately, would be, we will of course be happy to provide responses and submit them back.
Absolutely. This has been excellent. So thank you everybody who's joined us, who stayed on even after time. This is very great subject. You're fine. You're fine. This is great. It just shows that, people are really interested and having great questions and engaged. And this has been fabulous. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Victor, Catherine, and Lauren for presenting and answering questions. And we look forward to all of you, hopefully wanting to use the Student Cognition Toolkit and helping your students get better study skills. So.
Well, thank you for inviting us to present again on the Student Cognition Toolbox. We really appreciate that.
Of course.
And thank you all for your excellent questions and contributions.
So with that, I'm going to stop the video recording.